The children were still as stones when Emmett Cole found them that morning, huddled against his barn door like abandoned calves. The oldest couldn't have been more than 8, her arms wrapped tight around 2 smaller bodies, her eyes watching him with the kind of wariness that came from knowing the world could hurt you. A crumpled envelope lay pinned beneath a rock at their feet, and even before he read it, Emmett knew his quiet life had just shattered like glass under a boot heel. He'd been alone for 6 years on this patch of Montana soil, ever since Margaret died, bringing their son into a world that didn't let the boy take a single breath. The town of Keeper's Bend had learned to let him be, this man who spoke only when necessary, who rode in for supplies once a month and never stayed for conversation. Now he stood in his dusty yard, hay fork still in hand, staring at 3 pairs of eyes that looked at him like he might be salvation or damnation, and they weren't sure which. The note was brief, written in a shaking hand. "These are Sarah's children. She passed 2 days ago. Fever, no other family, you're their only kin. I'm sorry, Emmett, God forgive me, Pastor Wendell." Sarah, his sister. He hadn't seen her in 12 years, not since she'd run off with that traveling salesman who promised her a better life than Montana dust. The memory of her laugh felt like something from another man's story now. And here were her children, proof that life had a way of circling back to collect debts you didn't know you owed. The oldest girl shifted, pulling her siblings closer. Her dress was patched in 3 places, worn thin at the knees. The boy beside her couldn't have been older than 5, his face streaked with tear tracks through the dirt. The youngest was maybe 3, a girl with tangled brown hair who'd fallen asleep against her sister's shoulder despite the cold. "You hungry?" Emmett's voice came out rougher than he intended, rusty from lack of use. The oldest nodded once, sharp and cautious. He gestured toward the house, a modest structure he'd built with his own hands back when he'd still believed in futures. "Come on then." They moved like a single creature, the oldest keeping the younger too close as they followed him across the yard. Emmett's boots kicked up dust that caught the morning light, turning the air between them golden and strange. Inside, the house smelled like wood smoke and the loneliness of unwashed dishes piling up because there was no point in keeping things neat when nobody would see. He set about making breakfast, eggs from the 3 hens he kept, bread that was 2 days old but still good enough. The children sat at his table without speaking, their eyes tracking his every movement. He could feel their fear like heat coming off a stove, and it made something in his chest twist tight. "I'm Emmett," he said, setting plates in front of them. "I guess I'm your uncle." Lucy, the oldest, pointed to herself, then to the boy. "That's James." Her hand moved to the sleeping girl, Annie. "Your ma was my sister." Lucy's face didn't change. "She said you lived far away, said you probably forgot about us." The words landed like a fist. Maybe Sarah had been right. Maybe he had forgotten, not about her exactly, but about the world beyond his fence line, the people who existed outside the small circle of his grief. James started eating with the desperate focus of someone who hadn't had a full meal in days. Annie woke up slowly, confused and reaching for her sister. Lucy broke off pieces of bread and fed them to her, tender and automatic, the gesture of someone who'd been mothering longer than she should have had to. "How'd you get here?" Emmett asked. "Stagecoach driver, Pastor paid him to bring us, said it was charity since Ma used to clean the church." Lucy's voice was flat, reciting facts. "She got sick real sudden. One day she was fine, next day she couldn't get out of bed. Pastor said it was God's will." Emmett had heard that phrase too many times in his life. God's will, as if putting a name to suffering made it easier to swallow. After breakfast, he showed them where they could wash up, gave them blankets for the spare room that hadn't been opened since Margaret died. Lucy took charge immediately, settling her siblings like she'd done it 1,000 times before. Emmett watched from the doorway, uncertain of his place in this sudden reshaping of his world. "We won't be trouble," Lucy said without looking at him. "Soon as we can, we'll figure something else out." "You're not trouble." "Everybody says we are. Pastor said we were a burden on the church. Said he couldn't feed 3 extra mouths, not with winter coming." Emmett felt something hot and angry rise in his throat. What kind of man of God turned away children, but he kept his voice level. "You're not a burden here." Lucy finally looked at him, searching his face for the lie. When she didn't find it, something in her shoulders loosened, just barely. He left them to rest and went back outside, needing the space to think. The morning was warming up, the sun climbing over the eastern ridge, painting the grassland in shades of amber. His cattle grazed in the distance, oblivious to how everything had just changed. He'd built this life to be simple: wake, work, sleep, repeat. No complications, no pain beyond the usual ache of a body used hard. Now there were children sleeping in his house, children who needed feeding and clothing, and God knew what else. Children who looked at him like he might send them away at any moment. By noon, he'd made a decision. He rode into Keeper's Bend, his horse's hooves raising small clouds on the dry road. The town was the same as always, a single main street lined with weather-worn buildings, people going about their business with the slow certainty of those who knew every face they'd pass. The general store stood at the center, its porch crowded with men discussing the coming winter and whose cattle looked best for market. Their conversation died when Emmett dismounted. Cole, Benjamin Hart, who owned the feed store, nodded. "Surprised to see you in town so soon. Just bought supplies last week." "Need some things." Emmett tied his horse and climbed the steps, aware of the eyes following him. Inside, the store smelled like leather and coffee, and the sawdust they spread on the floors. Clara Jameson stood behind the counter, a woman near his age with gray threading through her dark hair and a way of looking at people that suggested she saw more than they wanted to show. "Emmett," her voice was warm but curious, "what can I help you with?" "Need clothes, children's clothes. Girl about 8, boy about 5, another girl maybe 3. Clara's eyebrows lifted. "Children." He could feel the weight of her question, the assumption forming. "My sister's kids, she died, they came to me." "Sarah," Clara's expression softened. "Lord, I didn't know." "I'm so sorry." "Need the clothes, and some other things, shoes if you have them, whatever kids need." Clara moved through the store with practiced efficiency, pulling items from shelves and folding them on the counter. "You'll need warm things, winter's not far off, and they'll need school supplies if they're staying." "They're staying." Something passed over Clara's face, approval maybe, or respect. "Good, those children need someone." Heard what happened down in Twin Forks. Pastor Wendell's a hard man when it comes to charity. Emmett paid for the supplies, more money than he usually spent in 3 months, and loaded everything into his saddlebags. As he worked, he could feel the town's attention on him, conversations starting and stopping, speculation spreading like wildfire through dry grass. Edna Morrison approached him as he was mounting up, her face pinched with concern that didn't reach her eyes. "Emmett Cole, is it true you've taken in 3 children?" "It is." "Well, that's very Christian of you, but surely you realize you can't raise children on your own. A man needs a wife for such things. Those children need a woman's care. They need food and shelter and someone who won't throw them away. I can manage that." "But the propriety." "Ma'am," Emmett's voice went cold. "Those children are my blood. I don't recall asking for your opinion on how I raise them." Edna's mouth pursed tight, but she stepped back. Emmett rode out of town with the sensation of having crossed some invisible line, of having declared himself in a way that couldn't be taken back. When he got home, he found Lucy outside with James, the boy chasing chickens, while his sister watched with an expression that might have been amusement if she'd let herself feel it. Annie sat on the porch steps, playing with a pinecone. Lucy's eyes went to the packages on his horse. "What's all that?" "Clothes, figured you'd need them." He carried everything inside and set it on the table. Lucy followed slowly, James and Annie trailing behind her. When he unpacked the dresses, the shirts, the small boots, Lucy's face did something complicated, surprise and suspicion, and something that might have been hope if it hadn't been buried so deep. "This is too much," she said. "It's what you need. We can't pay you back." "Don't remember asking you to." Lucy picked up one of the dresses, simple blue cotton but new, unmarked by wear or patching. Her fingers traced the fabric like it might dissolve. Nobody's ever, she stopped, pressed her lips together. You're my sister's children, Emmett said quietly. That makes you mine now. I don't do things halfway. The days that followed fell into a strange new rhythm. Emmett taught them the routines of the ranch, feeding the chickens, collecting eggs, helping with small tasks that made them feel useful. Lucy watched him constantly, waiting for the moment he'd change his mind, waiting for the anger or the rejection she'd learned to expect from adults. But Emmett just kept moving through his work, quiet and steady, making space for them in his life like it was the most natural thing in the world. James started talking more, asking questions about the horses and the cattle, his small face bright with curiosity. Annie followed Emmett around like a shadow, her hand occasionally reaching for his when she was uncertain. And Lucy began to relax in increments so small they were almost invisible, her shoulders dropping, her voice losing some of its defensive edge. 2 weeks after they arrived, Emmett rode into town again, this time with all 3 children. Lucy sat in front of him on the saddle, James and Annie sharing the horses back behind him, their small hands gripping his coat. The town's reaction was immediate, heads turning, conversations stopping, the weight of judgment settling over them like snow. Emmett guided them to the schoolhouse, a small building at the edge of town where Miss Caroline Foster taught children from 6 to 14. She met them at the door, a slender woman with kind eyes and ink stains on her fingers. Mr. Cole, I heard you'd taken in your nieces and nephew. Need them enrolled. Lucy's 8, James is 5. Miss Foster looked at the children, her expression thoughtful. Can they read? Some, Lucy said before Emmett could answer. Ma taught us when she had time. Well, we'll see where you're at and go from there. School starts at 8, ends at 3. Bring slates if you have them, and lunches. Emmett nodded. They'll be here tomorrow. Walking back through town, he stopped at the general store again. Clara was out front, sweeping the porch, and she smiled when she saw them, getting them settled in. Trying to. It's good what you're doing, Emmett. Not many men would take on 3 children alone. She paused, her broom stilling. But Edna Morrison's been talking. You know how she is. She's got half the church ladies convinced those children need a proper home with a proper family. Emmett's jaw tightened. They have a home. I know that. I'm just warning you. There's talk about bringing it before the town council. They might try to take them from you. Something cold settled in Emmett's chest. On what grounds? You're unmarried. You're a man alone. They'll say it's not proper that children need a mother. Clara's eyes were serious. I think it's nonsense, but that won't stop them. That night after the children were asleep, Emmett sat on his porch and stared out at the dark shapes of his land. The wind carried the smell of sage and dry grass, familiar and grounding. He'd thought providing for them would be enough. Food, shelter, safety. He hadn't counted on the town deciding his family was their business. The council meeting was set for the following week. Emmett spent the days leading up to it working harder than usual, trying to ignore the knot in his stomach that tightened every time he looked at the children. Lucy had started to smile occasionally, small quick things that vanished fast, but existed. James had stopped flinching when Emmett moved too suddenly. Annie had begun calling him Uncle M, the name sweet and trusting in her small voice. The night before the meeting, Lucy found him outside after supper. The sun was setting, turning the sky purple and orange, and she stood next to him in silence for a long moment. You're worried, she said finally. Some. They're going to try to take us away. I won't let them. You can't stop them if they decide. Towns can do what they want. Lucy's voice was matter of fact, the voice of someone who'd learned that powerlessness was just another fact of life. Emmett looked down at her, this small, fierce girl who'd carried her siblings through grief and uncertainty, who'd learned to expect nothing so disappointment wouldn't hurt as much. I'm going to that meeting tomorrow, and I'm going to tell them exactly why you belong here, and if they don't listen, I'll figure something else out, but I'm not letting you go. Lucy's eyes shimmered in the fading light. Why? Because your family, because your mama was my sister, and I failed her by letting so much time pass between us. Because you 3 deserve someone who'll fight for you. He paused. because having you here reminds me there's more to life than just getting through it." She looked away, her jaw working. "I don't remember Ma talking about you much. She said you were sad, said you had reasons to be." I am, but maybe that's changing." The meeting house was packed the next evening, more people than Emmett had seen gathered in one place since Margaret's funeral. He sat in the front row, hat in his hands, feeling the press of eyes on his back. The children were home with Clara, who'd offered to watch them without Emmett having to ask. Mayor Hutchins called the meeting to order, a gray-haired man who'd run the town for 20 years through drought and prosperity both. "We are here to discuss the matter of the Cole children and their current living situation." Edna Morrison stood immediately. "It's indecent, Mayor. 3 children living with an unmarried man, no woman in the house to provide proper care. Those children need a stable home, a family that can raise them right." "They have a family," Emmett said, his voice cutting through the murmuring. "They have me." "But you're alone, Mr. Cole. You can't give them what they need." "What do they need that I'm not providing?" Emmett stood, facing the room. "They have food, they have clothes, they're going to school. They have someone who wants them, which is more than they had 2 weeks ago when they were dropped on my doorstep like unwanted baggage." "It's not about want," Pastor Wendell said from the back, his voice oily with false concern. "It's about what's proper, what's right in the eyes of God." Emmett turned to look at the pastor, and his voice went deadly quiet. "You want to talk about what's right? You sent 3 grieving children away from the only home they knew because they were inconvenient. Don't stand there and lecture me about God when you couldn't be bothered to show them basic human kindness." The room erupted in whispers. Wendell's face went red, but he didn't respond. Clara Jameson stood up, surprising everyone. "I've known Emmett Cole for 15 years. He's an honest man, a hard worker, and the kindest person I've ever met, even if he doesn't show it often. Those children are thriving with him. I've seen them in town. They're clean, they're fed, and they're starting to look like children instead of scared animals. That's what a good home looks like." "But the impropriety," Edna started. "The impropriety is this town sticking its nose where it doesn't belong," Clara said firmly. "If Emmett were a woman raising 3 children alone, nobody would question it. But because he's a man, suddenly it's a scandal. That's nonsense, and we all know it." Several people nodded. Others looked uncomfortable. Mayor Hutchins raised his hand for silence. "The council will take this under advisement. We'll make a decision by week's end." The meeting dissolved into small conversations, people clustering in groups, debating. Emmett pushed through them and out into the night air, his chest tight with anger and fear. Clara followed him out. "You did good in there," she said. "Might not matter." "It matters." She hesitated, then added, "Emmett, if you needed, if it would help with the council, I could say I'm helping with the children, coming by regularly to assist with their care." He looked at her, this woman who'd shown him more kindness in the past weeks than anyone had in years. "I can't ask you to lie for me." "It wouldn't be a lie, I'd do it." Her eyes were steady. "Those children need you, and you need them, even if you won't admit it. I'm not going to let this town take that away because of outdated notions about propriety." "Why?" "Because I've watched you disappear a little more each year since Margaret died. These past weeks, you've been coming back. That's worth fighting for." The decision came 3 days later. Mayor Hutchins rode out to the ranch himself, his horse plodding slowly up the road while Emmett watched from the porch, his heart a stone in his chest. The children were inside doing their schoolwork at the kitchen table, unaware that their entire future hung in the balance. Emmett Hutchins dismounted, his face giving nothing away. "Mayor." The council voted. It was close 4-3. He paused, and Emmett felt time stretch impossibly long. "They're staying with you, but there are conditions. Clara Jameson has agreed to check in regularly, make sure the children are being properly cared for, and you'll need to bring them to church on Sundays, show the town you're raising them with proper values." Relief flooded through Emmett so intensely he had to lock his knees to stay standing. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. Thank Clara and the others who spoke up for you. And Emmett, don't make us regret this decision." I won't. After Hutchins left, Emmett stood on the porch for a long moment, feeling the weight of the past weeks settle into something solid and real. When he went inside, Lucy looked up from her slate, her eyes questioning. They're letting us stay. You were never leaving, but yes, it's official now. This is your home. Lucy set down her chalk carefully, like she was trying to hold herself together. Then she crossed the room in 3 quick steps and threw her arms around Emmett's waist, pressing her face against his shirt. James and Annie followed immediately, the 3 of them clinging to him like he was the only solid thing in a tilting world. Emmett's arms came up slowly, carefully, gathering them close. He couldn't remember the last time he'd held another person, couldn't remember the last time touch had meant anything but grief. But this felt like something breaking open inside him, something frozen finally starting to thaw. You're stuck with me now, he said, his voice rough. Good, Lucy said against his shirt. You're stuck with us too. The weeks that followed were far from easy. There were nightmares that woke Annie screaming, moments when James would ask for his mama and then cry when he remembered she wasn't coming back. There were days when Lucy's walls went back up, when she'd retreat into the defensive silence she'd learned to survive with. But there were also small moments of grace. James laughing at the chickens, Annie bringing Emmett dandelions she'd picked, Lucy letting herself be young for just a few minutes while she played with her siblings in the yard. Clara did come by regularly, true to her word. She taught Lucy how to make bread, showed her the tricks of keeping house that her mother hadn't lived long enough to pass down. She was gentle with the children in a way that made Emmett realize how starved they'd been for softness, for someone who could be kind without expecting anything in return. One evening in late October, as the first real cold was setting in, Clara stayed for supper. It had become a habit, her helping with the cooking, the children setting the table, all of them sitting together like something close to a family. After the meal, the children went to do their evening chores, leaving Clara and Emmett alone at the table. You've done well with them, she said, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee. They're different than when they first arrived, happier. They're strong, they were always going to be all right. Maybe, but they needed someone to believe in them first. She paused, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup. Can I ask you something? Go ahead. What changed your mind? That first morning, you could have taken them into town, turned them over to the church or the town council. But you didn't. Why? Emmett was quiet for a long moment, watching the lamplight flicker across the table. When Margaret died, something in me died too. I didn't want to feel anything anymore because feeling hurt too much. I built this whole life around not feeling, not connecting. And then those kids showed up, and they were scared and alone, and I realized. He stopped, searching for the words. I realized that not feeling hadn't made the pain go away. It had just made everything empty. And I didn't want to be empty anymore. Clara's eyes were bright. That's the bravest thing I've ever heard anyone say. Don't know about brave. Feels more like I finally stopped being a coward. She reached across the table and put her hand over his. Well, for what it's worth, I'm glad they came to you, and I'm glad I get to be part of this. Her hand was warm, her touch gentle, and Emmett found himself holding on just a little longer than necessary. When she finally pulled away, the space between them felt charged with possibility, with the suggestion of something that could grow if they let it. By the time winter truly set in, the children had claimed every corner of Emmett's house and heart. They argued over chores, complained about schoolwork, tracked mud inside after playing in the first snow. They were loud and messy and demanding, and Emmett loved them with a fierceness that sometimes scared him with its intensity. On Christmas morning, he woke to find all 3 of them crowded into his room, James bouncing excitedly while Lucy tried to pretend she was too old to be excited about presents. Emmett had spent weeks carving small toys for them, had traded with Clara for fabric to make Annie a doll. They opened their gifts on the floor of the main room, the fire crackling, the house warm with life. Lucy held up the wooden horse he'd made her, turning it over in her hands. It's beautiful. You like horses, thought you might want one to keep. She looked at him, her eyes serious. Uncle M, can I ask you something? Always. Do you ever miss being alone? The question caught him off guard. James and Annie were playing with their toys, lost in their own world, but Lucy was watching him with that careful intensity she hadn't quite lost yet. No, he said honestly, not even a little bit. Even when we're loud, even when things are hard. Especially then, being alone was easy, Lucy, but easy isn't the same as good. This, he gestured at the room, at the chaos of torn paper and excited children and the life that had bloomed in his silent house. This is good. This is what I was supposed to have all along. I just didn't know it until you showed up. Lucy smiled then, a real smile that reached her eyes and threw her arms around his neck. I love you, Uncle M. The words hit him square in the chest, filling spaces he hadn't known were hollow. He held her tight, this brave, fierce girl who'd carried more weight than any child should have to bear, who was finally learning it was safe to set it down. I love you too, sweetheart, all of you, more than I knew I could love anything. Outside, snow was falling soft and steady, blanketing the ranch in white, turning the world clean and new. Inside, the fire burned warm, and children's laughter filled the rooms, and Emmett Cole, who'd spent 6 years learning to live without hope, found himself believing in futures again.